Hello and welcome to this study of Joshua. This is Allen and I'm Josh, and today we're looking at Joshua chapter 22 as we come to almost near a close of this study, which it's been, I agree, extremely beneficial. I've enjoyed it a lot, so I hope those who have been listening have enjoyed it as well. We'd like to remind everyone, per usual, if you have not read the chapter, just take a moment, hit the pause button, read through Joshua chapter 22, and then join us as we continue the study. And if this is the first time you've just stumbled upon it and you're new, I'd encourage you to go back to the very beginning with the introduction and work your way up until you catch up as well. It'd be well worth the time as well. So without further ado, we'll turn it over to Allen and we'll begin our discussion.
All right, chapter 22 begins the last section of the book of Joshua. I will remind you, back in the introduction, we pointed out that Joshua is a book about the land. It's about the land of Canaan that God had promised as far back as Genesis 12:7 to the descendants of Abraham, that they would enjoy the land that his feet were at that time walking upon. Now, when you look at the outline of the book, which is structured, you can see on the screen, there are 4 sections to the book. So chapters 1 through 5, entering the land. They cross over the river and they go into Canaan's land. Then chapters 6 through 12, you have taking the land. So that's the ultimate highlight of the early part of the book, is they're dividing, conquering, and taking over the cities, the vineyards, the olive yards, the wells, all the things that would make a settled life easy and practical. They were getting from rewarded by God because of the sins of the Canaanites and because he was rewarding his people who had been in slavery. And then chapters 13 through 21, the section that we just completed, is dividing the land. So they each divvied up, received a certain section, and then those individual tribes divided among the families of the tribe. Now we've entered into the last section, which is serving in the land. Now they are beginning what will continue throughout the rest of the Old Testament period. They'll be living in the land of Canaan, except those times when God has to carry them away into captivity because of sin. But this is always home base. And they're going to come back to these same areas that they have inherited through the years. They're going to come back to the same areas that are allotted to them here in the book of Joshua. So I'll just point out also at this point, as we go into these last 3 chapters, that there are 3 speeches in the book. The first one is God's orders in chapter 1. And then the last 2 chapters of the book, 23 and 24, are Joshua's first and second speech. So we're building up to that in chapter 21. And what we're doing in chapter 22, rather, but what we're doing in 22 is those east of the Jordan tribes, Reuben, Gad, half the tribe of Manasseh, they're the outliers because they requested the pasture land east of the Jordan River when they first came there under Moses. And they were awarded that, and now they've had to go fight all these years, and they've been around for the dividing of the properties, and now Joshua is dismissing them in chapter 22. They get to go home and enjoy their inheritance that God had awarded to them. So we pick up in chapter 22 now as we come down on a layer. That was the airplane view, and now we come down to the tree view, and we look at this one chapter individually. And each chapter we've looked at a title, key verse, key thought, and an outline of the chapter. So we'll do that with 22. The title we're assigning Joshua 22 is The Tragedy of a War Without Cause. The tragedy of a war without a cause, because here the 2.5 tribes are going to erect an altar, and the tribes across the river are going to see that, and they misinterpret what's going on, and they're ready to go to war with their brethren. And thankfully, cooler heads prevailed, and there was communication, explanation, and it's avoided. But the lesson here is the tragedy of a war without a cause. A lot of congregations have been torn apart because of a war that should have never taken place in the first place. Now, there are times when truth causes division. We understand that. But even that's a war that should have been avoided by everybody agreeing to to teach love and practice truth. But in the case that some don't, then there may be a legitimate separation. But a lot of times the separation really starts over personalities or misunderstandings that could have been avoided with more love and explanation and more reasonable heads prevailing.
Right.
And that's a lesson we're going to look at as we go through this chapter. But the key verse is verse 10. The key thought, before going to war, and that's in quotation marks, before going to war, get your facts straight. Some people shoot first, ask questions later, but that's not Christian. You know, give the other person an opportunity to be treated like you would want to be treated. The golden rule, Matthew 7:12. And so make sure that you're understanding the situation. We've all been misunderstood before, and we have all jumped the gun and misunderstood a situation. So pause, ask the questions, listen carefully, and then respond intelligently to the situation. A lot of times it will not end up being a war that we go to, but it's something that we can agree to. It's a matter of judgment, or it may even be something that we can get behind once we understand and support. Now, there are 34 verses in chapter 22, and those divide into 4 sections. So 1 through 9, the eastern tribes, those 2.5 tribes, Reuben, Gad, half tribe of Manasseh, are commended for their work, and they are dismissed to go home. 10 to 14, the altar is built on the east side of the Jordan River and criticized. Mm-hmm. And then 15 to 29, the accusation is made to the 2.5 tribes, and then it is answered. So that's where wisdom prevails in that section 15 through 29. And then 30 to 34, explanation accepted by the representatives of the tribes, and then they go back home to everyone who was waiting to see what was happening, and they communicated that, and the people were glad that they didn't have to go to war, that it was indeed a misunderstanding. So that's the overview of the chapter. Now we go down another level, to ground level, and we just read through the chapter and make our comments and observations as we go through these 34 verses. Joshua called the Reubenites and the Gadites and half the tribe of Manasseh. So let's look at this on the map. You have the Jordan River that splits the land of Canaan. It ends in the Dead Sea. It begins up at Lake Hula, and it goes through the Sea of Galilee, and then this very steep section where the Jordan River runs down a valley. But you had the children of Israel coming out of Egypt on the eastern side of the Jordan. So they're coming up and passing through the land of Edom and Moab, and then they get to the land of Ammon, and they're eventually going to cross over here across from Jericho, which is in this midsection. And when they're in this area, that's where the children of these 2.5 tribes say, we like this. We don't think it's going to be any better over there. We'd like to live here because we have flocks and herds, and this is perfect pasture land for us. Moses asked the Lord said, okay. And so they're given that permission. So Reuben is the southernmost. They inherit across from the Dead Sea in the land connects to the Moabites. And then the middle section is the property of Gad, and that's in the land of the Ammonites, or just outside. The Ammonites are their neighbors. And then Manasseh received the largest of those 2.5 tribes, even though they were only a half a tribe. And their area, the Hittites are up here in the very north, and the Armenians are over in this area. That's Damascus of Syria. So you can see there are a lot of Gentiles in that area. And the half tribe of Manasseh gets this area, plus the other half gets the largest portion, or a large portion. Maybe the land of Judah is a little larger, but the land of Manasseh, just the half tribe, is between the two. They have the largest of all the inheritances among the children of Israel. Now we go back to 22, and we see, having seen the geography of it, let's see the key players here. We have Moses, Joshua, the Israelites, and God in verses 2 and 3. So I've marked each one of those, and each one is significant in these verses. And said unto them, that is, Joshua says to these 2.5 tribes, ye have kept all that Moses, the servant of the Lord, commanded you. So they had been faithful to their agreement to Moses, and that was 40 plus years ago. Because that was 40 years wandering and then 25 almost at this point in the book. So you're looking at 60 plus years that they have lived up to their end of the bargain. They've done what they were supposed to do. So you've kept what Moses said and have obeyed my voice and all that I have commanded you. So there were additional commands related to the on the battlefield moments and the dividing of the land and be here at this time and do this. All those soldier commands had been kept by the children of these 2.5 tribes. And then you have not left your brethren. Those would be the 9.5 tribes that were on the western shore of the Jordan River, if that's the Jordan there over here. They had not forgotten that they had to fight for their brethren and to help them conquer their land. These many days until this day, but have kept the charge of the commandment of the Lord your God. So God is the foundation of it all, their relationship to God and to the leaders God appointed and to the people of God. So God is the reason that they have been blessed and the reason that they have kept their promise, because it was the will of God. Now in verse 4, and we'll come back and look at a sermon that begins here, 2 sermons actually that begin in this section, but I'd like to get verse 4 in our thinking before we do that. And now the Lord your God hath given rest unto your brethren. So the Canaanites, Hittites, all those 7 nations had been conquered. There were still pockets of resistance, but there was no organized armies or threat to the children of Israel. So now they can handle their own enemies in their own territory. So you're not needed over here to help them fight anymore. That's what verse 4 is saying. As he promised them, therefore now, return ye. I've highlighted those to put a box around those 2 words, return ye, because they're being dismissed here. And get you unto your tents and unto the land of your possession, which Moses, the servant of the Lord, gave you on the other side of Jordan. So now with those verses in our fresh in our memory, I want to go back and look at first some important leadership principles from Joshua here. We've had other sermons or studies like this in the book because Joshua is such a good example of how to lead. And the principles that you find here way in the Old Testament are still effective for elders and business leaders and fathers in homes. So whatever level you lead, these are good principles to understand and to practice. The first one is commendation. Attaboy. So Joshua says to the 2.5 tribes, you've done well. Now you could see how that would impact them, the leader, the one who was up in front of the whole nation of Israel, and he knows who they are. He's saying, you did a good job. That commendation means a lot coming publicly from the recognized leader of the people. So I think the application of that probably is obvious, but if you're an eldership in a congregation and you go through a building program or you go through an evangelistic effort or you go through whatever it is, it could even just be VBS, or maybe the change of teachers from one quarter to the next. It's always a good idea to take 3 minutes. It doesn't have to be a long time, 5 minutes at the end of a service and say, one of the elders get up and say, on behalf of the elders, we've been talking and we thought this was a good time to say thank you to all of our teachers. We have some of the best teachers in this congregation, and they give so many hours that we don't really know about. They're at home, they're studying, they're preparing their visual aids, and they're following up on their visitors. And we just want you to know, as elders, we appreciate what you're doing. It means a lot to this church. Now, that helps those teachers who sometimes they get tired, and they've been teaching maybe for a year or many years, and sometimes they wonder if they're being effective. And those children, those seeds they're planting may not come to bearing fruit for 10 years. If they're, 3 years old, 4 years old, 5 years old, what's taught to them at that stage, they won't obey the gospel, then they can't. But those things will still be in their thinking when they're 14 years old, when they walk down the aisle and they request to become a Christian and be baptized. So sometimes that's too far off to get the immediate pleasure or benefit of. So elders reminding them, it doesn't hurt sometimes for the elders to get up and say, brother, name of preacher, has been with us now for 3 years, and we just want to publicly commend the work that he's doing here. And the congregation is at peace, and we've had a lot of spiritual growth that we've seen. And there are people involved that did not used to be involved, and people have been restored. And there have been a number of people who are here now that weren't here then who have been baptized into Christ. And part of that certainly goes back to the pulpit, and we are grateful for his work here. Well, that just means a lot to a man, especially a young man, but really anybody likes to be recognized and encouraged. And the wisdom of that from an elder standpoint is just he's going to have a little more pep in his step. He's going to be a little more energetic. He's going to maybe if he was thinking about maybe cutting back a little, or just, he's going to say, well, I want to do a little more than we've done before, because he's enthusiastic. So same thing is true in a father in a family. When's the last time your wife heard commendation from you, sincere? What about the children? We have to get on to them sometimes when they mess up and they do things they shouldn't, and that's part of being a parent. But it's good to also catch them doing good and remind them of, I'm so happy with you. If we had it all to do over again, I would certainly pick you to be in our family. We just love you so much. Those kind of things can really help develop the psyche, the mental strength,
Absolutely.
and the self view that a child has as they grow up, because there's a lot of things working against them, and they need to feel like at home they get me, they understand me, they love me here, so they can always come home when it's rough and hard at school or at ball field or with their friends. They can come home and say, this is where I can heal, this is where I can rest, this is where I can be myself.
Well, and it helps with chastisement when correction is needed. If you're commending them, then and I've had coaches throughout my football career, and the ones when they would get angry and they would rip into me, if they would commend me when I did well, then I listened to the criticism and took it to
Human
heart.
nature.
Absolutely. And so you're absolutely right. Elderships, you have to have hard conversations. So if you're willing to make those commendations when someone does well, and then you have that hard conversation when they don't, then I'm going to pay attention to it a little bit more. That's because right. I know you're willing. It's not just nitpicky. You go out of the way to commend me. I appreciate that you're going to go out of the way to criticize as well.
And if you're loved, you can take it.
Absolutely.
If it's just a professional relationship or just a formal relationship, elder to member, that can be a little harder. But if it's brother Jim, he's my friend, we talk, we do things together. Well, it's a lot easier for him to put his arm around me walking out of the church building and say, I just need to talk to you for a minute.
Right.
It's a lot easier to take, because I know he doesn't have anything but my best interest in his heart and the best interest of the church. Yeah.
And that's a leadership kind of just, not a quality. It's kind of just a rule of thumb is build up in public, break down in private.
Well said.
And I
had never heard it said that way, but I see the wisdom of that. Now, there are 3 more leadership qualities, practices that you see Joshua doing in 3 and 4. The second one is encouragement. So commendation, you did this well. Encouragement, you can go home now and enjoy your life. Enjoy settling your part of the country. So it differs from commendation, although they're from similar perspectives. The third is a reminder. Sometimes we do need to be reminded of what's next. We finished this task. You did a really good job on this evangelistic gospel meeting. So many of you brought guests. All right, we're completed with that. Our next task will be, let's follow up with them and invite them to come to our regular service. So you're just reminding and keeping the ball rolling. The fourth one in this context is direction. Now, therefore, return you and get you to your tents and the land of your possession. So he's saying, you're done on this side of the river. You can go home and get back, get to what you really, your personal requirements. Now, before we leave these first 4 verses, I want to go in a different direction. We've looked from the top down, from leadership principles, but now we're going to look from the bottom up, from the follower's perspective. And these are 5 commendable characteristics. And you see they're being commended here, but from the perspective of those who want to be commended, who need that, desire that, well, what receives commendation from God and from the leaders who have God's perspective? So there are these characteristics. First is diligence. They had kept all that Moses had commanded. So they had been diligent and not haphazard or lackadaisical. Number 2, they had been obedient, obeyed my voice in all that I've commanded. So diligence, obedience. Number 3 is support. They had supported their brethren. They had been unselfish and helped others conquer the part of the land that these 2.5 tribes would never live in. So they had been supporting their brethren. And much of what we do in the church, we don't personally benefit from, but our brethren do.
Right.
And that's important to support your brethren. And then they, in turn, will support you. It's just a brotherhood. And then number 4 is endurance. But you have kept the charge of the commandment of the Lord. You know, that was 25 years ago when they came into the land of Canaan. They were coming out of the period of the 40-year wandering, and they were looking forward to being able to live here, but that was a quarter century ago. But he says, you've been faithful all these years. So there you have endurance. And all of us, at least most of us, who obey the gospel in either the teenage years or young adult years, which are when most conversions take place. Not always, but most of the time. Well, unless one suffers an untimely death, or unless the Lord comes in that last generation, we're going to need endurance.
Right.
You know, so many people make it for a while, a year or 5 years, or sometimes even 15 years. And then something happens. They get mad at a brother, or they get enticed by false teaching, something, and they lose out. They don't endure to the end. And Ezekiel 18, of course, talks about if a righteous man forsakes his righteousness in his later days, the earlier days won't be remembered, because it's not how we begin, but how we end. The same thing is true on those who sinned and were wicked earlier, but then they are righteous in their latter years. That's what will be. It's how we die. It's how we end. Mm-hmm. So we want to make sure that we endure. And these 2.5 tribes are a good example of that. And then the last one is submission, the commandment of the Lord your God. They had submitted to God. So diligence, obedience, support, endurance, and submission, 5 commendable characteristics of God's children. And those are what the leaders should be looking for and highlighting, and that's what the followers should be practicing, so that God is pleased with both sides. He's pleased with the workers. He's pleased with the leaders, because everybody's on the same page. So I think that's an interesting section, or 2 good lessons to pull from that first part of the chapter.
Can I point one thing out?
Absolutely.
Just with Joshua, going back to his the good leader characteristics you talked about, I noticed he uses the second person pronoun to talk about them conquering the land. Joshua is obviously a part of this. He led them into these battles and so forth. Very easily could have used first person plural. We did this, and probably would have been effective. But it seems to me more effective that he's taking, as a good leader, taking it out and giving it to them. You have done this, you have done this, you have done this, which, doesn't go unnoticed when people hear that. Now, pronouns, we may not think about it in that sense. Oh, he's using the second person pronoun. But when you commend somebody with that pronoun, it goes further. It does make sense. It's a selfless act, I guess. It's not nothing. It's not big. It's not a grand gesture, but it's very something that's very subtle that would have encouraged them as well.
I grew up when Bear Bryant coached University of Alabama football, and I can remember a quote from him that fits well with what you're saying there. He said, "If it's good, you did it. If it's neutral, we did it. if it's bad, I did it.
That's good.
Yeah. As a coach, he would take the blame, even though the players were obviously the ones on the field. But he said, I didn't coach them well enough. That's my fault. We'll do better next time.
Right.
I think there's some psychology to being a leader, and that shows it. And it really ties in with what you see here with Joshua. Let's move on into verse 5. And this is where he moves into from commendation to assignment. You've done well, but as you're moving in this new stage of your life, these will be the important things. And that's good leadership too, isn't it? So I've got a sermon on this with this verse straight out of the text, taking the verbs, and it's called 6 to-dos on God's servants list. 6 to-dos. I have a to-do list every day. I'm a list maker, and that gets me through a lot of different kinds of responsibilities. So I rearrange them so today's to-dos are at the top, and I don't find them tomorrow and say, oh, I was supposed to do that. Invest a little bit of time every morning to your to-dos, and then hopefully you get through more than just today's and get some of tomorrow's or some of next week's. But here's a lesson: 6 to-dos on God's servants list. And I've subdivided those 6 into 3, the 3 questions. So I'm going to highlight the word to do in the first part of verse 5, but take diligent heed to do. So here's your to-do list. The commandment and the law, which Moses, the servant of the Lord, charged you to love the Lord your God, and to walk in his ways, and to keep his commandments, and to cleave unto him, and to serve him with all your heart and with all your soul. So you can just follow the word to through that, and you see that it's used 6 times. It's used 6 times, and each one of those is connected to a verb that's important. Now, 6 is a little bit long to remember for most people. So you can just ask 3 questions that will cover the entire verse. So the first question is what? In other words, what is on my to-do list? And that's the 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. Then the how. There are 2 answers to that. Take diligent heed. Be diligent in the first part of the verse, and at the end of the verse, with all your heart and with all your soul. That's how. Be diligent and put your heart in it. Recognize it's your soul that depends on your service to God. So the what, 6 to-dos. The how, diligence with all your heart, with all your soul. And then the why is right in the middle. The servant of the Lord charged you because of your relationship with God. Everything goes back to pleasing him. So he is the motivation. I want to be judged faithful on the last day. I want to have a positive experience at the judgment day. Enter in the joy of your Lord. And that's the why, because all of life is lived in view of a relationship with God, whom you love with all your heart and with all your soul. So that reminds us, of course, of Matthew 22, 37 through 40, where Jesus was asked, what's the great commandment of the law? And it's very similar, especially to the last part of that, with all your heart, with all your soul. That's also repeated in Mark 12:30. And then in the epistles of Peter, 2 Peter 1, 5 through 8, you have his admonition to be diligent, to add to your faith virtue, knowledge, like that. So the diligent part you find in the New Testament as well. And also, while we're mentioning that, Hebrews 2, 1 through 3, we ought to give the more earnest heed to the things which we have heard, lest we should let them slip. So I think this is a preview of New Testament Christianity. Some things were the same back then as they are now. Loving God was true back then, true now. Learning and obeying God, true back then, necessary, also true for us. So this is a good lesson to teach, a good verse to teach that lesson from. All right, we'll move into verse 6. So Joshua blessed them. We might ask our question there, who am I blessing and how? as an elder, a leader among God's people, as a father, as a boss, supervisor, manager, owner of a company, who am I blessing? I should be blessing those under me. They're not there to serve me. I'm here to serve them.
Mm-hmm.
And yes, they must carry out the things that we're doing together, and they should honor me, respect me because of the role that we have. But really, I'm in it to bless others, and I want others to be better off because they've known me. Mm-hmm. So you might ask yourself as an individual, whatever capacity you're a leader in, what am I doing that blesses people?
Right.
Because Joshua was a blesser.
Mm-hmm.
He blessed them and sent them away, and they went unto their tents.
Well, and all those things you talked about as far as respect and getting things done will come if you're benefiting others.
It's a win-win.
Absolutely.
There's a philosophy in the business world. If I can help you get where you want to be, mm-hmm. I'll get where I want to be.
Absolutely.
You put yourself in enough people, put your influence, your energy into others, you rise with them.
Mm-hmm.
But if you try to use them for your purposes, depending on how strong your personality is and the strength of the structure, you may be able to do that. But you'll never rise as high, and you certainly won't have the same relationship or the same self-image that you will have by, where does the joy come? Not from being served, but from serving. Not from demanding, but for people to have respect for who you are, and to see you as someone to be looked up to and imitated, and someone who's a friend. And the earlier we learn that as a leader, the better off we are, and the better off our organization is, especially the church. Since we're doing a Bible podcast, churches that have the kind of elders that are looking to bless the congregation, bless them with spiritual growth, bless them with opportunities, bless them with developing their talents, bless the children under them to grow up. And if you bless the children, you bless 3 generations in most churches.
Right.
You bless the children, the parents, and the grandparents. They're often right there in the same set of pews. And you can, any blessing that goes, especially to the young, trickles up.
Absolutely.
And the parents really appreciate it. And the grandparents we're really happy in this congregation.
I used to wait tables, and that was a tip when waiting tables. You take care of the children.
Really?
You make the parents happy. And
I never thought of it like that.
And it is true. As a parent, there are people I don't know very well, but I have a lot of admiration and respect for them, mm-hmm. simply because of the role that they had in my children, what my children think of them, the role that they had in my children's life, education or athletics or something
mm-hmm.
like that. And I appreciate it. I appreciate that they took the interest in my child, even though I don't know them personally and we don't have a relationship. There's still that admiration and respect for them, just simply because of how they treated my children.
Makes sense.
You're absolutely right.
Joshua blessed them, sent them away. They went to their tents. Verse 7, and now to the one half of the tribe of Manasseh, Moses had given possession in Bashan, and unto the other half thereof gave Joshua among their brethren on this side Jordan westward. So there's an east Manasseh and a west Manasseh.
Mm-hmm.
So they have property. We saw that earlier on both sides of the river. But unto the other half on the Jordan westward. And then Joshua sent them away also into their tents and blessed them. And he spake unto them, saying, return you with much riches. So yes, they had served for 25 years, but they had not served without benefit.
Right.
So they were rewarded for their time away from their families. They were now able to go home and have the wherewithal to be able to build, to support. And I'm sure that this was not a 25-year separation. They never saw their wives or children during this period. I'm sure it's like military service today. Right. They would be able to go home at breaks, but whenever there was time to go conquer, then they were there on time, ready to fight. So they've been away from their families in the sense of military service, but they are now going to be able to move back home and stay home. That's the idea. So I wrote the note above verse 8, military service ended. And then you can go with much riches. Well, what kind of riches? With very much cattle. Cattle in King James just means livestock. So it could be cattle, oxen, or it could be goats or sheep. A lot of times in this part of the country, sheep. With silver and with gold and with brass and iron and with very much raiment. So as they conquered those cities, they gathered they emptied the closets of the Canaanites and maybe even stripped the dead to have the clothes. And that was one form of wealth. That's been the case all the way through history and battlefields, but maybe we don't think of it. Clothing is cheaper now and much more plentiful. So we probably don't think of it as one of our assets as much as they did.
Right.
But certainly in this case they did. And then they are told to divide. So we want you to share the spoil of your enemies with your brethren. So no doubt there were some who were too old to go into battle, some that were too young, some that may have been injured or crippled or diseased that would be in need, and you're coming home loaded down. So don't forget the less fortunate.
Right.
Bless them also. And of course, that's a principle all the way through Old Testament, New Testament. God rewards those who care for the vulnerable and the poor, the widow and the orphan and the stranger, all that. Now, verse 9, and the children of Reuben and the children of Gad and the half-tribe of Manasseh returned and departed from the children of Israel out of Shiloh. So Shiloh is on the west side of the Jordan River. That's the new capital. So they're leaving there and crossing the river and going back over to where they're going to live. To the country of Gilead, to the land of their possession, whereof they were possessed, according to the word of the Lord by the hand of Moses. Now, verse 10, and when they came unto the borders of Jordan, that are in the land of Canaan, the children of Reuben, the children of Gad, half-tribe of Manasseh, built there. If this were a movie, the ominous soundtrack would be playing now because, what are they doing? So they built an altar by Jordan. They thought it was a good idea. They're coming home from the battle and the inheritance, and they've got an altar over there. We need one over here too. They thought it was a good idea. A great altar to see to. We would say today it was much to look at. It was big. It was impressive. Now, verse 11, now the Jordan River is not that wide. It's not like the Mississippi, or some other rivers that may be too far to see across or to see well. It's not that big. So those on the west side of the Jordan are watching, what are they doing over there? What are they building? They're building an altar. Well, what? They were upset about it. So they immediately decide they're going to go to war with them. Well, they're soldiers. They're used to fighting, and they just, if all you have is a hammer, every problem is a nail. That saying. It's sort of like that.
Right.
They're soldiers. They're used to fighting. Well, we'll go fight them. Well, diplomacy is what they need here, and thankfully they did try that before they went to war. But they're ready to go to war. Now, I want to point out something as we before we get into the whole conversation. I want to back up and think about what would have been better than building an altar as a memorial. This was not a good idea. I mean, they did not mean anything nefarious by it, but it wasn't a good idea. There are other memorials in Scripture that would have been much better on this occasion too. So you have a stone pillar for a memorial in Genesis 31:43 through 52. Stone pillar does not imply religious sacrifice.
Right.
It's just a marker. That would have been fine. An altar, though, implies a sacrifice, and that's the problem. Another one would be the stones that Joshua set up. They already had a precedent. He put stones in the river at the place where the river went dry as they crossed over, then stones up on the bank where they camped that night. Just a stone memorial so that if you later wanted to go back and visit that memory, or maybe take your children and grandchildren that weren't even born at that point, say, come on, we're going to go on a day trip. Let's go up to Jericho and go out to Gilgal, and then we'll go to the river, and I want to show you something. So here are the rocks. These rocks were in the riverbed, and they brought them up on this great day when God worked this great miracle. And you see out there right in the middle, that one rock standing up, that's a stack of rocks that the the men put in the middle of the river to in the place where it was dry. And you can still see it, so that would help the younger generation to buy into it. That would have been an appropriate memorial here. Why not just do the same thing at another place on the riverbank?
Mm-hmm.
This is where we came back from conquering the land. And a third better idea would have been an Ebenezer monument, such as is found in 1 Samuel 7:12. All those would have not raised an eyebrow, but an altar raised an eyebrow. Now, before we go on into how this all works out, let's think about how the altar could have easily led to a sin. An altar versus one of these others. So we think about Judges 8:27, which is a little later in history, but you can see how these two events are parallel. In Judges 8, you have the ephod that was awarded the judge. And an ephod is just an apron, but it was made out of valuable materials. And the people started worshiping it. And so here is something religious in nature, worth a lot of money, that these weaker believers in God, but not strong believers because they're willing to worship an idol, that's the same kind of thing here. A religious thing is easy to morph into false worship.
Yeah, the brazen serpent.
Exactly. 2 Kings 18:4, same kind of thing. Nahashtan. They worshiping the serpent that serpent didn't save the snake-bitten people. Right. God did, but they humans are tempted with material things. We're material people. And then the third one, or the third point under this, it could easily later, even though it was not their intent, what about 2 generations down, somebody saying, hey, we got an altar here, let's give God sacrifices right here. It would be very easy to morph into a competitive altar and a false, something God didn't ever authorize. So you can see 1 Kings 12:25-33 would fit there. So they made a bad decision even though they had good intentions. And we have to look into our intentions. And even though they're good, we have to say, well, where will this lead? A lot of times apostasy comes in small steps at the beginning that become big leaps later. And once you start down that path, then, that path may lead somewhere you never saw it going. The original generation did not see. Now, I want to go into verse 11. You may have something to say, I'm sure you will, about this, but I've written above verse 11, the danger of hearsay. And let's see that in the text. And I put 1 Corinthians 1:10-12 as an example. You might comment on Paul's experience in Corinth. And the children of Israel heard say. So I underline heard say there. This is what's going around, the rumors going around. Behold, the children of Reuben and the children of Gad, half tribe of Naphtali, have built an altar over against the land of Canaan, the borders of Jordan, at the passage of the children of Israel. And when the children of Israel heard, so underline verse 12, heard of it, the whole congregation of the children of Israel gathered themselves together at Shiloh to go up to war against them. So the danger of hearsay, the rumors getting around. Now, in this case, it wasn't false information. They were building an altar, but it was a false interpretation of the information. They weren't doing it to offer to a strange God or even to offer to the true God from an unauthorized source or place. So what about the danger of hearsay in the church? Have you seen that?
Oh, yeah. In fact, I have 1 Corinthians 13:7 next to this, where Paul, says, bear all things, believe all things, hope all things, and endure all things. And when you take it in the context of what it's talking about, it's this approach. Now, the altar being built, like you mentioned, shows the importance that we need to be cognizant of how things are perceived, what we're doing is perceived, and it adds validity to the slippery slope argument that many try to discount, but it's a valid argument in situations like this. But like you mentioned, Paul touches on it from that standpoint, bears all things. So there's not a fight. We don't pick and choose the fights. If we see a brother or sister doing something that's detrimental to their soul, bear all things. Love is going to address it
Right.
every time. But then that idea of believes all things, that's the idea of trust, giving someone the benefit of the doubt.
Mhm.
I'm going to, I see this altar going out. I'm going to assume that the conclusion I'm jumping to is
reality,
is wrong.
Oh,
You know what I mean? If I think, they're trying to build
that's got to be the only interpretation is mine.
Right. So I'm going to give them the benefit of the doubt, and I'm going to find out about it and make sure. And and then the hope is, if it comes down to the point that my trust was misguided, that they are going to start worshiping pagan, gods or so forth, then my hope is that they repent, they fix it.
Right.
And then endures, I'm going to give them as much time as I possibly can to do so. Now, it might require, discipline, something along that line, but whatever it takes to bring that brother or that sister back,
can we salvage?
I'm going to endure it as long as possible.
That's a beautiful interpretation.
And so that's why I have the 1 Corinthians 13:7 next to it. And you're absolutely right. Hearsay. I mean, how many times has hearsay? We've played the telephone game, and it's always. I played it. We played it in school when I was younger, and I remember there was just a rowdy couple of kids who would intentionally change it just to.
Every group has that,
and you have that in the church. You have that, people who want to, they'll take a little nugget of truth, embellish on it to try and cause issues, and then the same thing: misunderstandings, misinterpretations. One detail gets left out, and it changes the course of how it goes. So you're absolutely right. It's
and Paul faced that, didn't he? He said. I've heard from the house of Chloe these things, and I partly believe it.
Right.
I think there's a lot of wisdom in that. Partly, we would say today, I take it with a grain of salt.
Right.
Now, Paul, of course, had the Spirit to guide him, and he answered what kernel of it or part of it was truth. And maybe all of it was, but certainly Paul dealt with what the division there was. But I've always thought, I smile when I read that. The house of Chloe, it got all the way to me over here. And so I think there's something to this, but I don't buy into all of it.
Right.
And I don't believe the worst. I think that's helpful. We should have that attitude.
Absolutely.
Now, I want to notice in verse 13, the children of Israel sent unto the children of Reuben, Gad, Manasseh, in the land of Gilead. So they crossed the river and they went over there. They didn't take the army in. They sent Eleazar the priest, the last part of verse 13, and representatives among the elders of the people. So some influential people, wise people, experienced people, go over there and talk to them. So I think this was a wise course of action to talk about it before you fight them, and it may lead to that, but let's see if we can stop ahead of time. There's another lesson that I see occurring, or another transition there is a transition I see occurring in verse 13. Joshua did not go.
Oh, that's interesting.
Yeah. See, the transition to the next generation has already taken place. Eleazar went, and he was the leader. And other representatives, later in the book, we're going to see that after Joshua died, the people of God stayed faithful as long as those elders who had lived at the same time as Joshua were alive. But that next generation was when they departed. So these men that went are part of those that stayed after Joshua, that kept the people faithful. So they were already being used or looked as leaders, looked to for leadership, and being sent across the river. I think that elders are wise, really leaders in any capacity, are wise to prepare men to take over when they're not there anymore.
Right.
That know the ropes, and to put, I don't know if this is the right way to say this, but to put a little glory on them or a little respect on them. In other words, Joshua received that when Moses was the big name. He was the lawgiver, and Joshua was just his sidekick. But now Joshua is the man. And everybody that knew Moses, he's just, just a memory. And a lot of people never even knew him. They just know of him. And so Joshua's the man. But now Joshua is putting a little glory or a little respect on these elders and Eleazar the priest. So there's a lesson to be learned there, I think, for good transition to generational transition. All right, we'll pick up the pace a little bit. Verse 14, and with him 10 princes of each chief house, a prince throughout all the tribes of Israel. What I'm reading here is a little different than when the spies were sent out because every tribe was said to be represented then. Mm-hmm. So one representative per tribe. This is a little different where 10 men who are recognized as leaders among the tribes. So not necessarily, there might have been 3 from one tribe and none from another tribe, but it's sort of like from battlefield promotions.
Right.
So, they're the men that went through the training back in, military school, and they go and the war starts and they're the leaders. But when they get killed, then there's nobody out there to lead. Who leads? Well, there's battlefield promotion, and they don't promote based on where you went to school or what degree you have. Right. It's bravery and ability on the field, and it's not so much awarded, it's just taken. Somebody's got to take the amount of leadership, and this man steps up. He may be a private, but he takes the leadership of this battle because of who he is, what he is. That's sort of what you see here is men who are recognized for the leadership already. They're princes among the children of Israel. So I think the lesson from that is pretty easy to observe is, you're going to appoint new elders and deacons. You need to give some consideration to who already is a leader, right, who already is doing the work. He may not be as wealthy as others in the congregation. He may not have as much education, may not have as prestigious a job, that kind of thing. But is he doing the work? Is he qualified? That may be the best qualification, assuming that he meets all the scriptural qualifications of family man with children and, all that. Mm-hmm. But just the fact that practically he knows what to do and he does it. Now, let's move on into verse 15. And they came unto the children of Reuben, Gad, Manasseh, spake to them, 16. What trespass is this that you have committed against? So they just come right out, put it on the table. What sin are you doing here? We want to know what are your intentions? To turn away this day from following the Lord, and that ye have built an altar that ye might rebel this day against the Lord. So you're being rebellious against God, and we don't like this. We want you to fix this. So they make the accusation, but the good thing is they made it to the face of the people they were accusing.
Right.
And that's the weakness that it's a weak leader or a weak Christian who goes around talking about somebody to everybody else and doesn't have the guts to go talk to the person and to say, am I seeing this right? I'm seeing this is what I see, and you need to repent of this. And that gives the person an opportunity to be shocked and surprised and say, no, I had no idea this was going around about me, but that's not what's happening here. Let me explain. And that's exactly what they do here. Now, before I leave verse 15, I want to give you some examples of bad decisions leading to trouble or to sin. Lot pitched his tent towards Sodom. What did that lead to? Oh. Sin. Genesis 13 and also Genesis 19. What about Abraham or Abram at this time, who went in unto his handmaid and fathered a child? Was that a good idea? That was not a good idea. It was Sarah's idea, but all the religion of Islam and all the wars that have been associated with that, and even to this day, problems. Where did all that come from? Mm-hmm. It came from Abraham because he went in unto Hagar. So problems come from bad decisions. And then what about David, who committed adultery in 2 Samuel 11? Well, that brought a lot of problems in his life and to Israel's life. And if I don't handle today well, then it may impact the rest of my days. Right. Sometimes you can make a decision in 15 minutes that you won't ever get over. Like David, how long was the sin with Bathsheba? I don't know. Part of a night. How long did he have to deal with the consequences of it? 20 years. Mm-hmm. So you can't, you think about people that are in prison, how long did it take them to do the crime that put them behind bars versus how long they're behind the bars? Maybe just a minute to pull the trigger. They're going to be for life in prison. So you want to make good decisions in the moment, in the heat of the moment, lest you have to deal with it, right, and lest you hurt other people too. So that gets us down to verse 17. And this isn't a sermon that you see on the screen, but it is an analysis of the text, because what Phinehas does when he gets there is give them two examples of sin in their history that he thinks they're the third example of. So in verse 17, he brings up the iniquity of Peor. Back in Numbers 23, it's Baal Peor. You hear the name Baal, the false god there. And that's where Balaam tried to curse God's people. And Eleazar was personally involved in that. You can go back and notice in Numbers 25:11 that this same man is mentioned. So he's saying something. He said, I dealt with this before. And there was sin involved, and it was a problem. Well, let's read 17, and I'll make a couple of comments. Is the iniquity of Peor too little for us? Wasn't that enough? Didn't we learn our lesson from that? From which we are not cleansed until this day. So there's still a stain on our history from that. And it seems that there was still some residual idolatry, because we're going to see later that Joshua says, put away the gods among you. Well, what do they have gods among them for? Some of that residual idolatry that may have come down from Baal Peor and the influence of that bygone, almost generational now. That was done at the time of Moses. I think that's all I'll say about verse 17. 18, but that you must turn away this day from following the Lord. Why are you forsaking the Lord already, seeing that you rebel against the Lord, that tomorrow he will be wroth with the whole congregation? You're going to get us in trouble too. Right. You're going to see, and you make your mistake, but we're going to be held accountable because we let you do it or because you did it on our watch. And then the second one is in verse 18. And what about Achan, who took the accursed thing? And that caused 36 men to die at the Battle of Ai. So just because one person sins doesn't mean he's the only one punished, seems to be Eleazar's reasoning here. And I think a good one. I think that we will probably come back into this last section in our next study. I don't want to rush through this, there's especially 24 and 25, some lessons there. So maybe you have a closing comment.
No, that's great. Join us again. We'll pick up here in the middle of 22 and continue on. Thank you.